Hi there, and welcome to the next lesson. Today we're going to be learning about how Johnson's men responded to guerrilla warfare, um, and it's kind of looking at the two different sides of this war. We've learned about who the Viet Cong were, and we learned about the Viet Cong tactics. We've learned about how each president got more and more involved, starting with sending advisors and then eventually gaining more and more of a base within Vietnam. But today we're going to look at what tactics the United States used against those guerrilla tactics that the Viet Cong used. So please make sure you're completing your work on your assignments. Please make sure that when we get to the end of this lesson that you hand it in to me. Our do now is, how do you think the US responded to guerrilla warfare, and what do you think the US had that the Viet Cong didn't? So pause the video here for 5 minutes and complete that question for me. So the US have got to respond to guerrilla warfare. If the Viet Cong are hiding in the jungle, then the Americans need to find a way to penetrate the jungle and stop them from being able to hide there. They have high advanced weaponry, more advanced weaponry than the Viet Cong do. They have a huge amount of money at their disposal, and that resource gives them access to lots of things that the Viet Cong wouldn't. Okay, so better food, better weaponry, better technology. However, the US didn't have the support of the people, which is the main reason the Viet Cong did so well. So let's get on with today's lesson. So what I want you to do is I want you to read this source carefully. I want you to tell me what it tells us about the US reaction to Viet Cong tactics. This is Philip Caputo, a lieutenant in the Marine Corps in Vietnam in 1965, speaking in 1997. I remember sitting in the wretched little outpost one day with a couple of my sergeants. We'd been manning this thing for 3 weeks and running patrols off it. We were grungy and sore with jungle rot, and we'd suffered about 9 or 10 casualties on a recent patrol. This one sergeant of mine said, "You know, Lieutenant, I don't see how we're going to win this." And I said, "Well, Sarge, I'm not supposed to say this to you as an officer, but I don't either." So there was this sense that we just couldn't see what could be done to defeat these people. So pause the video and tell me what this says about the US reaction to Viet Cong tactics. So overwhelmingly, this is a negative interpretation. Philip Caputo, who's a lieutenant in the Marine Corps, is pretty much saying that he doesn't know how they can win. And it shows that the Viet Cong were beating the Americans because they were lowering their morale. They were attacking them. They were so concerned with the fact they couldn't win that they were too distracted to do well in the war. So what I want you to do now is I want you to compare it to this source. This is General William Westmoreland. The attitude of the enemy was not comparable to what our attitude would have been under the circumstances. He was ready, willing, and able to pay a far greater price than I could say we would. So, compare it to that source. I'll give you 5 minutes. So General Westmoreland is saying that the issue is that these Viet Cong soldiers are willing to pay the ultimate price. They're willing to die for their land, whereas the American soldiers are not. They are not there to sacrifice themselves for a different country. So finish those two answers off for me, and then we'll move on. So we are now going to look at 3 tactics that the Americans were using. Each one you need to watch the YouTube video and you need to answer the questions. So Operation Rolling Thunder, you need to stop this, watch the other video, I'll put it in the description below, and you need to answer how successful do you think this operation was. So I'll see you after you've watched the video. So on the 7th of February 1965, the US launched Operation Rolling Thunder, which was an extensive bombing raid on military and industrial targets in North Vietnam. The list of targets was soon expanded to include town cities and the Ho Chi Minh Trail. Sites in neighbouring countries, Laos and Cambodia, were also targeted. So, how successful? Think long term and think short term. So there were successes of the Operation Rolling Thunder, which was the supply routes were disrupted. The US was able to keep fighting while reducing ground forces, and intense bombing of Hanoi, which was North Vietnam's capital, forced them to negotiate with the South. So Operation Rolling Thunder was successful because it stopped US soldiers having to go into the jungles and fight the Viet Cong head on. However, the US was only slowing down the Viet Cong. It never was able to defeat them with Rolling Thunder, And also the US was spending a fortune. Bombs are incredibly expensive. It was calculated that they were spending $400,000 every time they killed a Viet Cong fighter. So they were wasting so many bombs and they were so ineffective that for every $400,000 spent, it equaled about one Viet Cong casualty. So finish writing Operation Rolling Thunder and then we'll move on. So chemical weapons. This is probably one of the most iconic images to come out of the Vietnam War. This shows a scene directly following a napalm attack, where the girl in the picture has been drenched in this stuff, this chemical, and it's caused a huge amount of distress, and this was shared around the world. So the US developed Agent Orange and also napalm. What I want you to do is I want you to pause this video and watch the two videos in the link, so one on Agent Orange and one on napalm, and then I want you to tell me what how the use of chemical weapons affected US soldiers, the Viet Cong, and the Vietnamese people. So Agent Orange was a weed killer, and it was dropped on the jungle, thinking that if they killed the jungle, then they would have nowhere to hide. However, it was poisonous. It poisoned water sources, and it has also been proven to be linked to a large amount of cancer patients, cancer cases within Vietnam, so it did huge amounts of damage. And napalm is a very highly flammable kind of incendiary liquid, which was dropped to try and destroy the forests again, deforestation, and that killed many civilians. Alright, so finish those two questions and then we'll be ready to move on. Okay, so the final one, search and destroy or Zippo raids. This is the troops going in. So I want you to pause the video here, I want you to watch the video, and at the end of the video you can answer the question. So what problems do you think there might have been with this policy? So a Zippo raid or a search and destroy mission is where soldiers would be dropped by a helicopter into a village and they would burn the village to the ground. They would destroy the entire village and force the villagers to leave. Now, why was this their tactic? Because Viet Cong soldiers were hiding openly in these villages and they were trying to turn the villagers against the Viet Cong. So they'd be so scared that the village would be burnt down that they wouldn't harbour them. However, this really backfired because it turned the Viet Cong civilians who might have been supportive of America completely against them. The US would descend on villages and destroy any Viet Cong forces they found. So they're called Zippo raids because the lighters used to set fire to the villages were Zippo lighters. So that's where it gets its nickname, Zippo raids. Okay. So, next task. You need to think about what US General Westmoreland was doing. Okay, he's just been sent a message from the president. It says, "I'm very disappointed that six civilians are being killed for every Viet Cong fighter you kill during Zippo raids. Are you sure this is the best tactic?" So what I'd like you to do is I would like you to write a response, a paragraph, so at least 3 sentences, writing a response to Johnson, explaining whether you think Zippo raids are the best option and why. And remember, he is in charge of the army at the time, so he wouldn't want to be criticised. I'm going to pause the video for 5 minutes while you get that done for me. Okay, so now we're going to have a look at another event that happened, and we're going to look at Mili. Now, Mili was a very important event that happened during the Vietnam War. So, this comes from the commanding officer of Charlie Company. Very early this morning, Charlie Company reached the village of Mili. They found Viet Cong soldiers sheltering. Between 280 and 380 Viet Cong soldiers were killed. Sadly, 20 non-combatants were killed by accident during the attack. Congratulations to the officers and soldiers involved who have helped us to further American interests. So I want you to read it. I want you to summarise what happened, and I want you to tell me how the US government should respond. So pause the video for 5 minutes and get that done for me. Okay, so the summary is there was a search and destroy mission on a Viet Cong village. They found 280 to 380 Viet Cong soldiers and they killed them. 20 civilians were killed accidentally. And America was the victor. So how should the government respond? They should give them medals. They should celebrate their huge victory at Mili, killing 280 to 380 Viet Cong soldiers when they've been spending $400,000 just to kill one. Really successful. However, this is not what actually happened at Mili. The government allowed people to believe that this was what happened. So, what actually happened? What I want you to do is I want you to watch the video and I want you to write some notes, a summary about what really happened. So you can pause there while you go and watch it. So Life magazine published an article 18 months after it happened. So the government hid the truth from the people for 18 months. They stated that 300 to 400 civilians had been killed, so not Viet Cong soldiers, 300 to 400 civilians, mostly women, children and old men. Some were killed whilst they were working, others were shot in their homes, many were herded into a ditch and killed by machine guns. Only 3 weapons in the entire village were found. The soldiers had been told the village was headquarters of the Viet Cong and was sheltering 200 guerrilla fighters. The soldiers had been told to destroy all houses, dwellings and livestock and kill anyone in the village. They had been told it was a market day, so the only people left would be the Viet Cong fighters. So some very poor intelligence has led to the deaths of 300 to 400 innocent women, children and old men. Lieutenant William Cayley, who led the raid, was tried and he was found guilty of murdering 22 civilians and he was sentenced to 20 years hard labour. This was clear evidence that the war was not going to plan. However, in November 1979, almost 700,000 anti-war protesters demonstrated in Washington, the largest protest in US history. Cayley was actually released after 3 years when the Vietnam War ended. So, tell me what happened at Mili, the reality of what happened in Mili for me. Pause the video here and finish that off. Okay, so Mili made the Vietnam War unwinnable for Americans. To what extent do you agree with this statement? I want you to think about problems people had with the war even before Mili took place. So what I want you to do is I'd like you to write 2 paragraphs, each one countering the other. So I want you to tell me that Mili was not an issue and that it was an issue. So Mili meant that no one could win the war anymore. Focus on the fact that people had been lied to and the government looked like it was out of control on the war. However, also focus on the other US tactics that we've included. Pause the video here for 10 minutes. Once you finish your 2 paragraphs, I would like a 1-sentence conclusion as well. How far do you agree with that statement? Okay, that brings us on to our final task. Okay, so the final task is only a 4-mark answer, and remember I am keeping a mark book at the moment, so please make sure you complete all your work. The final task is, this source supports the US, how do you know? And you need to explain the source and your own knowledge. So how does this support the United States? You would go out and would secure a piece of terrain during the daylight hours and you'd surrender that, and I mean literally surrender, not by force, not be forced off. Well, maybe surrender's probably not a good word, but you'd give it up because the helicopters, would come in and pick you up at night and fly you back to the security of your base camp. So this soldier would go out and fight. He would, you would reclaim land. You would lose comrades to secure land, and then at the end of the night, you'd just get picked up and taken back to a base, and the land would then be taken back over by the Viet Cong. So this sort of supports the US. How do you know? Doesn't really support the US. It makes the US seem very weak. So spend 5 minutes completing this task, and I'll see you at the end. Alright, thank you very much for today's lesson. Please make sure you are handing in your work. The submission rates we need to bring up. We need to make sure we get more completed. If you have any issues, please do contact me. Otherwise, I'll see you next lesson. Alright, have a great week. Goodbye.